Anybody done the Bird Box Challenge thing? Just curious. I thought about preaching that way today, and I thought, well, number one, there's steps, so I don't know if that's good. And the other part was it's probably not much different than how I preach regularly. So anyhow, but if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's a movie. It's out on Netflix, and it's got blindfolds in it. I think that's about all I know. But no, something maybe to do with fear in there, and that's what we're talking about today. Because our belief is that as we're in this Unchained series, that if we're really going to experience the abundance that God wants for us, that Christ died for us to have, that we're going to have to deal with some fear along the way. And so that's our topic for this morning. But I wanted to first figure out what you guys might be scared of. So if you'll raise your hands, if you might have one of these deals. Anybody have FOMO? Fear of missing out. That's what all the kids say, right? And so if you have that, now's your chance to not have that because you can vote on these next ones, for real, okay? Anybody scared of clowns, or is it just Stephen, our senior pastor? Anybody else scared of clowns? Raise your hands. It's really okay to raise them. How about heights? Anybody scared of heights? Yeah, that one gets more people, okay. Spiders. Anybody got spiders? Or snakes? Or you can put both together if you got both. It's all right, right? How about tight spaces? Yeah. Or also the same fear would be like shopping on Black Friday, right? And kind of deal, yeah. So, how about the dark? Anybody just scared of the dark? That can own that one. How about this one? Public speaking. Anybody scared of public speaking? Okay. How about death? Not many hands. So here's the interesting thing. So some of you think that's a trick question from the preacher guy, right? And he's going to like haul us on that, right? You know, there's a problem. That's okay, because to me, public speaking and death are a lot of times the same fear, right? I mean, it really is. But if we think about that idea with the public speaking part, really what we're scared of is, well, they'll judge me, right? I mean, what if they, we're scared of what people think about us. A lot of us are. So anyhow, how about failing? Anybody with failing? Scared to try new things? How about commitment or intimacy? Or I notice your hands aren't going up as quickly now. And that's what happens. Like with we get fear of rejection sometimes. Hands quit going up because what we know is that fear, it's a powerful thing. I mean, it really is, and it impacts us in a lot of ways. What's amazing to me is how the brain goes to work to process fear. And you've got these brain cells that are just sending signals all over the place. And overall, there's like a dozen places in the brain that have some little part of this. But there's 5 major ones that are parts of the brain that really are taking this information from our senses, like from our touch and our smell and our eyes and taste and all that kind of stuff. And they're sending it all up to the brain. And the thalamus is up there and it's kind of deciding where to send all that sensory data, right? And then there's the sensory cortex, which is interpreting all that data. And then the hippocampus, which stores and it retrieves these conscious memories, and it processes all that stimuli, knows where to make a context for all of that. We're going to talk about that some this morning. The amygdala is decoding those emotions, and it's processing whether something's really a threat to us, a possible threat, and it's storing those memories, right? So that if you got bit by a dog as a kid and now you're fearful of dogs sometimes, that's the work of that. And then the hypothalamus is activating this fight or flight response that is designed into us. So it starts with this scary impulse, and it goes all the way up to this thing where we've got to either put up our dukes or put on our tennis shoes, right? And we're going to get away from it. What's crazy is that some of those main chemicals that are doing all that stuff in the brain up there are also the things that help us to establish whether something has pleasure in it for us, or it's a positive emotional state, right? Something brings us joy, something gives us excitement, something is just a good experience. And so you got the same stuff giving you both this panic mode as well as this side of that's allowing you to smile about a situation. So what is it that determines whether we get a rush or whether we feel completely terrorized? And one of the big pieces of that is context, right? So when our thinking brain gives feedback to our emotional brain and we begin to perceive ourselves as being in a safe place, When we get to that spot, that safe place, we can quickly shift in our mind how we're going to process that. And so, for example, if you see this guy out in the wild, right, that's going to be kind of immediate fight or flight. Now, I got to be honest. Fight or flight's not going to work against him, okay? Because, I mean, you're not going to win the fight, and you're not going to be able to outrun him, okay? So that's more of a I'm going to curl up in a fetal position and just pray it doesn't hurt a lot whenever I go. But then you see this guy, right? And it's like, oh, I even heard it right down here. Oh, right? I heard it. Yeah, it's something that's context, right? That wall helps us to have a little bit safer view of that. And context is pretty important. It matters a lot in how we deal with fear. But maybe more importantly for us is another thing that helps. And it's this idea of, do we have a sense of control? Are we able to, when we're able to have that context and recognize something's a real threat or it's not, ultimately we feel like we are in a place of control. And so that perception is vital to how we respond to fear. And it's also vital to whether or not we can experience that as being assured that we are safe or that we're in danger. And so everybody's different. We all experience this stuff differently. Some of us like thrillers, more advanced people like comedies, okay? Some people like a good fight. There really are some of you sitting out there that just love to get going on with somebody, right? It can be verbal, it can be debate, it can be whatever, but sane people really don't think that. Some people like roller coasters. I kind of determined at age 35 they weren't going to have an important part of my future, okay? But context and control, all of those things are really important. And I think a lot of times we use the word fear like we use the word love. Like we have lots of ways that we can love something, right? That's a very complicated word if you're coming and trying to learn and understand what that concept is. But even just in the Bible, think about it. It says, don't fear, okay? Fear not. It says it a bunch, right? And there's memes out there that say there's 365 fear nots in the Bible, one for every day of the year. Well, if you really look at it, there's more like 160, okay? But still, that should be enough for us to be able to realize we don't have to be afraid. But think about the Christmas story. When Mary encounters the angel, when Joseph encounters the angel, what's the first thing they say? Don't be what? Don't be afraid, right? Translation, hey, this is probably going to freak you out. Don't pee your pants. I don't want to have to deal with that human mess kind of stuff right now as an angel. But God knows, right, our situation. He knows our tendencies. He knows our nature. So therefore, it's in his word a lot to not be afraid. And then Proverbs uses the word a little different sometimes. They'll say, fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Or Paul writes in Philippians when he's talking to them, he says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. In both cases, fear in that context is more about reverence. It's about awe. It's about a respect for God. It's about us knowing our place, right? That God's up here and we're down here. When you think about all the brain chemistry kind of stuff that we're talking about, it's kind of proof of what the psalmist wrote, right? I praise you, God, because I know that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I mean, it's a powerful way that we use the word fear. There's a lot of different ways. And for our purposes this morning, fear, anxiety, worry, all of those are on the table. I mean, all those can talk about what we're, describe what we're talking about. Fear generally is when you know what the threat is. It's kind of an understood threat, where anxiety is a little bit more of the unknown, what's over the hill, right? And of course, unfortunately, in our world, I think we all know worry way too well. If you're keeping score, Scripture says, fear not, but it also says, do not be anxious and do not worry. So we know that God is giving us that message. And if we're honest, when we experience any of those three, all that is usually about us really just fretting change. We may say we like change, but for the most part, we don't. And we worry about what's on the other side. Am I going to be able to handle it? And am I going to be able to survive? Is my quality of life going to be the same as it is right now? And when change comes our way, man, it's really hard to deal with. Change is even hard when we know that we've got to make a change, right? When that breakup has to happen because that relationship is abusive or it just is wrong for so many reasons. When the job is not fulfilling us, when it only makes us feel depleted and depressed. I mean, it's time to make a change, but it's a hard thing to do. When we can't live up to the expectations that other people have on us, and we know we might have to kind of rearrange some things there. When the compulsions and the cravings, when those things get the best of us, and we know that we just can't function in life. I mean, all of those are things where we know a change needs to be made, but man, change is hard. It's difficult. And we don't like difficult. And we like comfort. And I'm talking about, just modern creature convenience kind of stuff, right? A couple years ago, I went to help my mom. I was going up to do some handyman stuff in Ohio, and a big storm had come through, and there was no power for like 4 days. And it was like I was in some introduction to Amish camp experience, right? And I mean, there's just nothing we could do. There's nothing I could fix because I had power tools for all that kind of stuff. But it's not easy to give up that stuff. But I'm not really talking about that kind of comfort. When we're talking this morning, what we're talking about is the control that we have to give up. That control that we want to keep a hold of. Because it feels good, right? Knowing that we get to call the shots. We get to write the script. We get to determine what the agenda is. We get a lot of comfort in that. There's a power in it. There's really a false sense of security in it. And if we gut check here today, a lot of us sitting in this room, we really fear losing control. Now, we may say, hey, I'm a believer. I trust God. I follow Jesus. I do all those things. But honestly, the thought of surrendering and just letting go and letting God, it shakes us. It shakes the people that get up on the stage every week. I'm pretty sure it probably was shaking people like Billy Graham too. I mean, it's a normal human thing. And we're not the first people to experience that. We're going to be taking a look at Numbers, Old Testament book today, Numbers 13 and 14. And what's going on at the backstory is that Israel is being led by Moses, and they have escaped Egypt, and all of the Egyptians' chariots and men and all those kinds of things had all been crashed. They've seen them crash in the water and meet their demise. And so they get to that other side, and they are standing there, and they are waiting. They're waiting to go into this land that God has promised for them, and they are ready to do it. And so Numbers 13 is where that's at, and it says God tells Moses to send some guys on a recon mission into Canaan, okay? God's sending them into this land so they can check it out. So Moses grabs his men and is getting ready to send them in. And he says, hey, I need you to go in. I need you to see what the land is like, right? Whether the people there, whether they're strong or whether they're weak. Are they many or are they few? I need you to know what the land is like. What are their cities like? Are they fortified? Are they in camps out in the open? What's it like? How are they living? Okay. What is the land like? Is the soil good? I mean, is it fertile? Could we plant trees and fruits and all those kinds of things? Could we reap harvest? How many trees they got? Bring back some produce. Do all this stuff. Go also find out if they got a Costco and they've got a Trader Joe's, because we're not going in if they don't have it, right? I actually had somebody tell me recently they weren't moving to Knoxville if we didn't have those two things. Well, good. We got a city for you. We got a church for you. Come on. Anyhow, so they're at that point, and that's what Moses has sent them to do. And here's the report back. Verse 27, this was the report to Moses. We entered the land that you sent us to explore, and it is indeed a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here's the kind of fruit it produces, because they brought back the samples. But the people living there are powerful, and their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. And like the Hebrew for Enoch or Anak means like Godzilla, right? They saw monsters, huge people. They saw enough stuff to keep them from wanting to go in there, is what the majority of them said. But verse 30 says, but Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. He said, let's go at once and take the land. We can certainly conquer it, is what he says. Keep track of Caleb's position. We'll be talking about him in a little bit. But the other men who explored the land with him disagreed. They said, man, we can't go up against them. They're stronger than we are. So they spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites. The land we traveled through and explored will devour, strong word, anyone who tries to live there. All the people we saw there were huge. We even saw giants there. And next to them, we felt like grasshoppers. What a great analogy, right? Isn't it funny how two sides can look at the same exact situation and have totally different takeaways? Like tomato kind of thing, right? It's context. It's control. It's how you see it. Excuse me. Caleb sees this opportunity. The others just see a beatdown coming. I mean, that's what they see, right? And it can't be both. I mean, both of those can't be right, so it's got to be one or the other. One of the lessons for us is one of the things that fear does, is that fear magnifies our faults, our failures, and our foes. Fear is always going to do that to us. It's going to magnify our faults, our failures, and our foes. Do you remember that first time you did something wrong? You might have been little. You might have been a teenager. But you did something that you knew wasn't right to do. And you were afraid your parents were going to find out, right? So you began to worry. You began to hide. You got panicked every time the phone would ring because you were afraid someone was calling and they were going to tell your parents and you were going to be busted. That failure, that guilt, that shame. Or how about the time you realized that you weren't really as perfect as you thought you were, right? And it stung. And the insecurity, that stuff that it was all you could think of, right? And you started to see yourself as unlovable. And you wondered, how could anybody ever want to hang out with someone as flawed as me? Or when you realized that somebody was against you, and no matter what you did, you couldn't make them like you. I mean, you could get them flowers, you could do whatever, right? But there's no way they were going to like you. And for some reason, they were out to get you. And all of a sudden, your mind could only think of that. I mean, we go crazy trying to think what they're thinking. How are they going to make us pay? How are they going to try to embarrass us? How are they going to try to set us back or take us down? How are they scheming? And that's where our minds go, right? And those are horrible, horrible feelings. But they really are proof of what fear does to us. See, fear magnifies our faults, our failures, and our foes. And we blow things out of proportion. A few years ago, Stephen handed me a book, and the book was entitled Necessary Endings. It's by a guy named Henry Cloud. It was one of the authors of the Boundary books and really good stuff. We recommend a lot of those books around here. But the subtitle on the book was this: the employees, businesses, and relationships all of us have to give up to move forward. I was out of Hardin Valley at the time. That was my job, my piece was to be the campus pastor out there. And we'd had some struggles trying to find a permanent home for that group. Some of you guys may remember that. And we knew we had a great core group, but it wasn't growing by leaps and bounds or anything like that. And we knew that a tough decision was probably pretty inevitable. And to be honest, I felt a little bit out of the loop. And I've been wondering at that point, even if Stephen really wanted me on staff. And there had been discussions and decisions and conversations that I had been part of before, but now it felt like I wasn't being in those conversations and discussions. And to be honest, I was a little bit anxious about what the future held for me at Cokesbury. And then Stephen hands me this book called Necessary Endings. Great title, right? Yeah. Let me tell you, a little anxious went to full-blown fear really quickly. And I'll be honest, I don't see myself at another church. There's not really another place in town I'd want to go to. We're not moving. Our family's here, And so in my freak out, I called one of my friends and I said, hey, how much am I worth in the real world? And he says, whatever someone will pay you. And I'm like, well, thanks. That's great advice. I can really base my future on that. And I got into this season where I started looking into the possibility of being a contractor or being a handyman. I bought a truck because of that, because I thought I was going to end up doing some of that kind of stuff, right? I lined up some side hustles and was doing those things. I searched Indeed. I pondered who I knew that I could network with. I found myself thinking, man, if only I knew more people. And it was just kind of crazy when you see me at the back greeting everybody, right, that comes in. But I had my pity party. I lamented the fact that for 25 years, how had I just allowed myself to not have a real job? Because we only work a couple hours a week, right? And that's what everybody thinks. Yeah. And so, mind you, I did all of that without ever having a conversation with Stephen. If it's your first time, Stephen's my boss. He's our senior pastor, okay? But I had all that going on in my mind and never had a conversation with Stephen about it. You know what? Obviously, I'm here now, so I might have misread the situation a little bit. But it turns out he had no clue I was going through any of that. He just liked the book. He just thought it was a good book, so he wanted me to read it. So that was what it was. But for me in that season, man, fear, it made me doubt myself. Made me misunderstand what really gives me worth and value. A lot of that time I was probably just questioning God, and I was doubting my calling and my purpose. See, when we focus on fear, it impairs our faith. Fear's a liar. We just sang it. It's false evidence appearing real, right? It hinders our ability to trust God and to trust His plans for us. Check out what happens in chapter 14. Then the whole community began weeping aloud, and they cried all night, and their voices rose in a great chorus of protest against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in Egypt, even here in the wilderness, they complained. Why is the Lord taking us into this country only to have us die in battle? Our wives and our little ones will be carried off as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to return to Egypt? Then they plotted among themselves, let's choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. Fear was keeping them from trusting God. They already had seen Him do some great things in just their short journey, right, with Moses. But fear was giving them the woe-me's. And they're in this place where it's just, man, let's go back to that horrible place that we knew. Have you ever done that? Have you ever gotten out of something and the new place isn't maybe as great as you hoped or thought it was going to be? And you're like, man, we were better off back here. Let me go back into the pit. What it says next is that two of the men who had explored the land, Joshua and Caleb, they said to all the people of Israel, the land we traveled through and explored is a wonderful land. They're doing their sales pitch, right? And the Lord, if the Lord is pleased with us, He will bring us safely into that land and give it to us. It is a rich land flowing with milk and honey. Do not rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people of the land. They are only helpless prey to us. They have no protection, but the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. But the whole community began to talk about stoning Joshua and Caleb. Sometimes when we do the right thing and we speak out, that doesn't always sit well with other people, does it? And Joshua and Caleb, man, they did the right thing. They did the hard thing. I love where the story goes next. Then the glorious presence of the Lord appeared to all the Israelites at the tabernacle, and the Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? Will they never believe me even after all the miraculous signs I've done for them? I will disown them and destroy them with a plague. Then I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they are." See, when we fail to trust God, it's because we haven't experienced the faithfulness of God, or we've forgotten the faithfulness of God. I mean, those are the two reasons, right? If we don't put our trust in him, it's because we've never known how good God is to start with, or because we've forgotten how good God is. You know, and I'm positive there are people in this room this morning that are both of those camps. There are some of us that have never taken that step. We've never taken the next step of surrender to just let God into our life. You've thought about it, but you've just never done it. You've never said, "Jesus, I really need you." You have questions, right? You need more proof. And the doubts are too great, and they're real, and man, we all understand that. But the thing you need to know is that God is so crazy about you that he's gonna keep chasing and pursuing you until you finally say, "I need you." Because that's just what our God does. That's the way he loves. And there are some of us that have just gone through the motions with it. You know, we did something way back, we think it was in 6th grade or whenever it was, and we said, yeah, and we joined the church and we did all this stuff, but then life happened and stuff happened, and all of a sudden, it seems like we put God on the back burner, and we just kind of gave up, and it feels like we haven't felt the faithfulness of God forever. And some of us have just forgotten how good God is. Maybe 2018 was a tough year. Maybe there was the sickness or the surgery, or there was a loss, there was a death. Maybe there was a divorce or there was a layoff. You see, we just lost touch with the fact that God is good all the time. And if we look close enough at this story, I think we can all find ourselves in it. The places where we fail to trust God. And the consequences are harsh, it says. God says, "I will destroy and disown them." But what happens next in that story is powerful. Moses intercedes for the people. He basically pleads with God. He says, "God, hey, if you kill them all, how's the world going to know how awesome you are? I mean, you're the only God that dwells with his people. How is that going to happen if you wipe us out?" So God says he will spare them. But he says, but none of them will enter into that land that I promised to them. Because over and over they have refused to listen to my voice. Don't miss the symbolism here, the parallels. Just like Moses interceded for Israel, when we're in a relationship with Jesus, he intercedes for us. On the cross, that's what he does. The perfect sacrifice that goes to pay the price for people that sin and that are messed up like every one of us. And not only at the cross, but he also sits at the right hand of the Father, and he intercedes for us. He speaks to God on our behalf. And we will never be disowned because of what Jesus is doing and has done for us. That's great news. But even more than that, if we continually refuse to listen to God and for his voice, we are always going to be in a place where we feel chained, where we feel stuck. We'll never get to enter into that life that God has for us. That life that is a relationship with God that gives us freedom, that gives us confidence, that gives us hope. Last piece of the story, Numbers 14, verse 24. But my servant Caleb has a different spirit than the others have. He has remained loyal to me, so I will bring him into the land he explored. His descendants will possess their full share of that land. Did you catch that? He had a different spirit. Caleb had something that we all have access to. It's the same thing that Paul wrote to young Timothy about when he told him, he said, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. See, power, love, and self-discipline will help us to not let fear and anxiety and worry just run rampant in our lives. Remember last summer when that little soccer team was trapped in the cave? And it was flooded, right? And they were stuck and they had the long rescue. One of the things that they taught those boys to do was to be able to control their breathing through meditation. By being able to focus on something bigger than the moment. And as they were able to do that, it allowed their brains to work, and it allowed, even with insufficient air and insufficient amounts of food, they were able to calm themselves down. They were able to calm their heart rate and their breathing and their metabolism. You see, they had something in them. They had to focus on something bigger than themselves. And that's what Paul was telling Timothy, that we weren't given a spirit of fear. By God, we're given something that's of power. And so the choice for us is, what's going to hold you? Is it going to be a spirit of fear, or is it going to be the Spirit of God? That's the question today. Is it going to be a spirit of fear or a spirit of God? John would write in his epistles that perfect love casts out all fear. See, that perfect love that God loves us with, even if you haven't said yes to him, that love that knows you, knows the number of hairs on your head, that knows everything you've ever done and still is just crazy about you, that's the kind of love that takes fear away from us and allows us to be able to live in a way where we understand that we've got some power inside of us that's coming from something way bigger than ourselves. It's bigger than when we've failed, or when we realize how incomplete we are, or anybody that's trying to take us down, because our God is bigger than all those things. And he loves us with no strings attached. And that kind of love, it's not going to get rid of that fight or flight thing. I mean, he's put that in us to be able to help us survive, but it will help us to know that we can face tomorrow, and we can face the next day and the day after that and the day after that without having to feel like we're in chains. Because we know that he holds tomorrow, that he sets captives free. That's what he does. And that's what's available to us today and every day. As the band comes out and we close out, we gave you a piece of paper on your way in today. We don't want this to be a year where fear just holds you. We want it to be a year where you begin to feel unchained, right? And we know that we can't really get to some of the other things that we're going to get to in this series. Mark's going to have a great message for us next week. But we're not going to be able to get to some of those things until we deal with some fear in ourselves. And the way that we want to do that is just give you a chance to write that down, to lay it at the altar, leave it with God today. And then watch what God does. Maybe you end up being in one of those small groups we talked about, and all of a sudden you have some other voices coming into your life, and you're starting to just feel better about yourself and feel connected. Maybe the stress is in your marriage, and you decide you're going to do the KMI thing, and all of a sudden that you don't have to fear what's going to happen in your marriage because you're able to communicate about it and talk about it, and God just does a new thing, and there's such a bright future before you. Maybe it's in the financial piece or our legacy class. It might not be in any of those things, but trust me, God's not going to stop if those things don't work for you. He's going to keep chasing to just remind you that there's nothing to be afraid of when he's in your life. Because he's given you a love that casts out fear. And that's a powerful thing for us this morning. So this altar's open. You come now in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.